"Sir, step away from the gate. The HOA president says you're trespassing." That was the first sentence I heard when I pulled into my own driveway, headlights sweeping across the chipped white fence I'd mended with my own hands last spring. The red and blue lights painted my ranch in an unnatural strobe, and there she stood, Karen, in her immaculate blazer and pearls, clutching a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. She didn't even flinch at the sight of me, just lifted her chin like she was the sheriff of this cul-de-sac. I laughed, short and sharp, the kind of laugh you make when you know the whole world's gone insane. A cop car sat idling behind her, engine humming, officer shifting uncomfortably as if even he couldn't believe why he'd been called. The night smelled like hay and diesel, the normal sounds of crickets drowned out by Karen's voice, already carrying like a gospel sermon. "This property," she declared, "is in violation of 3 separate HOA statutes. Let me pause and make one thing clear. This was my ranch, my land, my name on the deed, the taxes, the county records. I had been gone a week, helping finalize a vote in another neighborhood, the kind of dry 3-hour HOA board meeting where grown adults scream about mailbox paint, and I came home to find my own neighbor trying to exile me with nothing more than a flashlight and a bad attitude. Karen didn't just love the HOA, she weaponized it. For her, every clause was a loaded gun, every bylaw a moral code. She had already sent me letters, pages of them accusing me of unsightly equipment, a tractor parked behind the barn, unauthorized animals, 2 goats approved by the livestock exception clause she never bothered to read, and my personal favorite, unapproved fencing material. Apparently, cedar boards offended her sense of uniformity. Now, she had escalated. Police, at my gate. The officer glanced at me, eyes apologetic. "Sir, she claims you made threats, that you said you'd bulldoze the HOA into the ground." My jaw clenched. "What I said," I corrected, "was that I'd bulldoze the ditch she had dug across my drainage line without a permit. You can check the county file. She knows it." Karen's smile was all teeth. She shoved the binder forward. "It's all documented. Section 14, Subdivision A, no unregistered vehicles on the premises. Section 22, livestock restricted to non-nuisance capacity. Section." I cut her off. "Karen, I wrote Section 22. The silence that followed was delicious. The officer blinked. Karen's pearls shifted against her collarbone as if even they wanted to retreat. See, here's the part she didn't know. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the elected president of our county's umbrella HOA committee, the board that set the template bylaws her little subdivision had copy-pasted years ago. I was the guy who had spent entire evenings parsing whether backyard chickens counted as livestock or pets. Karen was quoting scripture to the man who'd carved the stone tablets, but she wasn't ready to back down. "Then you should know better," she snapped, lips pursed like she was scolding a child. "You can't just waltz back onto this property and—" "This property," I interrupted, stepping closer until the officer subtly shifted between us, "has my name on it. The HOA exists to manage shared spaces, not seize private land. You called the cops because you don't like the smell of hay. That's not how governance works." Her cheeks flushed, a dangerous crimson. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? Because you sit in your little meetings with your little boards, writing rules for everyone else. Well, not here, not in my community." I tilted my head, pretending to consider. "Funny, because last I checked, this community falls under the same charter as all the others. And who signs off on those charters, Karen?" The officer's radio crackled, breaking the tension for a split second. Karen's smile wavered. She had wanted this to end with me handcuffed, humiliated under the glow of fluorescent police lights. Instead, she was realizing she'd staged a showdown with the wrong target. But I didn't press my advantage. Not yet. I wanted her to stew in that uncertainty, to imagine what cards I might play next. The officer finally sighed. "Ma'am, unless you've got proof of trespass or actual threats, this is a civil matter. We can't enforce HOA bylaws." He turned to me, softer. "Just keep it neighborly, all right?" Karen's jaw tightened so hard I could almost hear enamel crack. She gathered her binder like a shield and marched back toward her SUV, heels clicking against the gravel, muttering something about escalating to the board. I watched her taillights disappear down the dark road. The night quiet returned, broken only by the restless shuffle of horses in the pasture. What she didn't know, and what I wasn't about to tell her yet, was that I'd already scheduled a special county-wide meeting, one where her name would be the first agenda item. Because if Karen wanted a war of bylaws and binders, I was more than prepared. And she had just fired the first shot. "You think gravel is a crime, Karen? Because if so, half this neighborhood belongs in federal prison." That was the line that slipped out of my mouth, somewhere between exasperation and amusement, as she thumped her binder onto the folding table like it was evidence in a murder trial. A few neighbors stifled laughter, others just avoided eye contact. The fluorescent lights above buzzed and flickered, casting everyone in that sickly yellow glow that made the whole scene feel like a low-budget courtroom drama. Karen didn't even blink. Her pearls gleamed, her lips pursed, and her eyes narrowed into slits of pure conviction. Let me rewind, because this wasn't just any HOA meeting. This was Karen's stage play. I knew it the second I watched her drag those metal folding chairs into the clubhouse herself, each one screeching against the tile floor like a battle horn. She had carefully arranged them in a semicircle, her little arena for public humiliation. She wasn't inviting neighbors, she was summoning jurors. And the indictment? Me. She started strong, voice carrying across the stale air. "This community is at risk," she declared, as though we were discussing toxic waste instead of fencing materials. "We have ordinances for a reason, standards, expectations, and yet we have violations right here, in our own backyard." Her finger jabbed in my direction like a dagger. First charge, livestock ordinances. "2 goats," she said, voice dripping with disdain. "Not approved, not permitted." The fact that Section 22 clearly allowed livestock under nuisance exemptions didn't matter. She was counting on nobody else knowing the fine print. Second charge, fence height. "Over 6 feet, she claimed, flipping dramatically to a dog-eared page. Never mind the county variance form that sat in my filing cabinet signed and stamped months ago. Third charge, and this one nearly broke me, unapproved gravel. According to Karen, the crushed limestone I'd laid along my driveway had not been reviewed for visual harmony, as though gravel could be rebellious. Each accusation she delivered was another bullet loaded into her revolver, and she fired them with the precision of someone who had spent too many lonely nights memorizing bylaws instead of living. But here's the part that made me almost grin in the middle of her performance. Every single bylaw she quoted, every clause she wielded, I had either written or approved myself. She was throwing darts at a board I'd hung on the wall. I knew where the loopholes were, where the language bent, and where it snapped clean in half. I leaned back in my chair, letting her run. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to let your opponent tire themselves out. The smell of burned coffee from the clubhouse pot lingered in the air, mixing with the faint scent of floor polish. My neighbors shifted, some whispering, some scribbling notes on the bright yellow violation slips Karen had pre-printed. She was nothing if not prepared. Then she made her mistake. "Mr. Whitaker," she said full name, never just my first, because formality gave her power. "This board has the authority to levy fines, to restrict privileges, and to place liens if necessary. Your blatant disregard for the community's standards cannot go unanswered." I stood slowly, let the chair scrape back loud enough to silence the whispers. My voice was calm, even casual, but each word carried. "Karen, you're right. The board does have authority, but you seem to have forgotten one detail." I held up the attendance sheet I'd pulled earlier that day, the one listing every name signed in for this meeting. "This isn't your boardroom. This is mine, and half the people here answer to me in 3 different neighborhoods across the county. You're quoting bylaws that I helped draft, enforce, and, when necessary, repeal." A ripple moved through the room. Neighbors shifted again, This time not with unease, but curiosity. Suddenly, Karen wasn't the only one holding the script. She bristled, clutching her binder tighter. You can't just rewrite the rules to suit yourself. Funny, I said, tilting my head, because that's exactly what you've been trying to do, and tonight we all saw it. The air thickened. For a moment I thought she might explode right there, pearls snapping off her necklace like shrapnel. Instead, she smiled a thin, dangerous line. Then we'll put it to a vote. And there it was, her final card. If she couldn't bury me with bylaws, she'd try to turn the neighbors themselves against me. A vote in the wrong hands could mean fines, restrictions, even forced compliance. I glanced around the semicircle, faces caught between loyalty, fear, and the intoxicating thrill of neighborhood drama. Karen's gamble wasn't just desperate, it was smart. All she needed was a simple majority. I set the attendance sheet back on the table, folded my arms, and gave her a smile of my own. Then, let's vote. The room erupted, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, accusations flying. The smell of coffee burned stronger, as if even the pot knew this was about to boil over. And in the middle of it all, Karen's eyes locked on mine, unblinking, unyielding. One of us was going down tonight. But it wouldn't be me. Karen, this isn't your vote anymore. This is your hearing. That was the line that stopped her mid-stride, pearls catching the flicker of the overhead fluorescence as if even they knew the shine was about to dull. She froze, binder pressed to her chest, eyes scanning the room with the dawning realization that the semicircle of chairs wasn't filled with neighbors this time. It was filled with HOA presidents, dozens of them, each with their own binders, their own agendas, their own grudges against the woman who had turned suburban politics into trench warfare. She had walked in expecting a coronation. Instead, she got a firing squad. The smell of burnt coffee lingered again, stubborn and bitter, mixing with the faint tang of bleach from a freshly mopped clubhouse floor. Folding chairs squeaked as presidents from across the county leaned forward, flipping open thick binders that clapped like gavels. These weren't casual neighbors she could intimidate with gossip about mailbox heights. These were people who had spent decades counting vote quorums and memorizing lawn care ordinances. They didn't scare easy. Karen, of course, tried to. She slammed her binder down on the table so hard the plastic spine cracked. "This is highly irregular," she snapped, her voice cracking just slightly at the edges. This meeting was called to vote on violations concerning Mr. Whitaker. Nothing more. I stayed seated, calm as a judge. Karen, you did call for a vote, but as county chair, I expanded the agenda, and your item won. The room hummed with a collective murmur. Some presidents smirked, others simply nodded. They had all come armed. One by one, the binders opened. President Alvarez of Greenbrier Estates stood first, her nails tapping against the page. "We have documented instances of funds being redirected from common maintenance to, well," she looked up with a wry smile, "personal landscaping contracts. Premium rose bushes, installed at one address only. Yours." Karen's face went pale, but she didn't sit down. "That's slander. I have receipts." "That's the problem," Alvarez shot back. "We all do." Next came President Chu of Maplewood. He adjusted his glasses, calm but sharp. "We also found fabricated complaints, signatures from neighbors who don't exist, names that don't match property rolls. Funny how every one of those complaints targeted board candidates running against you." The murmurs grew louder, like a storm rolling closer. Binders kept slapping open, paper rustling like the sound of 1,000 guilty verdicts being drafted. Karen stood rigid, eyes darting, pearls trembling with each shallow breath. I finally leaned forward, my hands flat against the cool plastic table. "Karen, you built an empire out of fear. Violation slips slipped under doors like threats. Petty fines stacked until people moved away. You wanted power, you wanted control. But what you forgot, I let the silence stretch, is that this isn't your empire. It's ours. And tonight, we're taking it back." Her mask cracked then, just for a second. The forced smile faltered and her fingers tightened on her binder until the plastic groaned. "Motion to remove Karen from the Willow Creek board," Alvarez said, voice crisp. "Seconded," Chu added, almost before the words had left her mouth. Karen spun to face the room, eyes wild. "You can't do this. This is mob rule. You're letting him manipulate you." Her finger stabbed in my direction like she was back in the last meeting, trying to paint me as the villain. But the binders were stacked too high against her now. Votes were tallied, hands raised, motions carried. The numbers weren't even close. Still, I wasn't done. "Motion to amend county bylaws," I said clearly, making sure my voice cut through the commotion. "Effective immediately. Any individual removed for cause from one HOA board is barred from serving on any HOA board in this county. Ever." The gasp that followed was almost theatrical. Even Karen seemed winded, as though the air had been sucked out of her lungs. She shook her head, pearls quivering, lips parting to speak but no words coming out. The motion passed. Karen's legacy, her empire of binders and bylaw bullets, collapsed in less than 20 minutes. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They don't go quietly. She didn't cry. She didn't storm out. She just stood there, silent, binders still clutched in her hands like a lifeline. And then, with a voice low and deliberate, she whispered, "You'll regret this." No dramatics, no tantrum, just a promise. The meeting adjourned with the scrape of chairs and the thud of binders closing. One by one, the presidents left, some clapping me on the shoulder, others shaking their heads at the mess. Karen didn't move. She stood rooted, pearls catching the dying light of the fluorescence until the room emptied. I lingered last, the smell of bleach and coffee thick around me, the silence almost too heavy. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt watched. When I finally stepped into the night air, cool and sharp against my face, her SUV was still there, parked under the lone streetlight. Engine off, headlights dark. And I knew then this wasn't the end of Karen. It was the beginning of whatever came after the coup.